up with something.
Okay. Good evening, Boston Unity Group. Hopefully we are all live at this time, and it looks like we are. Great. Hi, welcome to July. We are back this month with a presentation from Laurent from Unity, who is going to be talking about really cool, exciting things, which we'll get to in a moment. Um, I see. Okay. Do we have auto-generated captions showing up tonight? That's pretty exciting if so, because I've always wanted to get that working.
I think
Um,
it's a Twitch setting.
it's a
So if
ca-
you mouse over your video viewer, there's a button in the bottom right. It says captions.
ah, okay. Yeah, click the button. Yep, now I see them. Okay, well, I hope that helps anybody who is having trouble with audio. Um, it's a very useful accessibility feature. It was working even while we were muted. Well, yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, all right. I don't want it to show chat on there. I do apologize. It's been a while since I had to do this, and it seems that Zoom is being very helpful today. So, anyway, welcome. We have. Uh, do we have any of the events coming up that we want to mention to people? Um, there are probably some coming up in the Boston Game
Yeah.
Dev Slack. Which, if you are not
So
on the Boston Game Dev Slack, you should join it. It is slack.bostongamedev.com. Okay.
so we have Boston Indies is doing a coffee hour, Friday coffee hour. This is a weekly thing that people do. It's at 8:30 in the morning, bright and early. Uh, you can find this all on the meetup page, meetup.com/Boston Game Dev, which I'll throw in the chat. It's also the Queer Game Dev Boston Monthly Hangout happening in Somerville on Sunday, August 13th, which is a couple weeks from now. And then August 22nd, Boston Indies is doing lightning talks. So that would be, I think, yeah, they're still doing it at the MIT Open Space, which is a really cool spot in Cambridge. If you haven't been there before, it's all outdoors. It's awesome this time of year. So yeah, so definitely sign up to give talks if that interests you. The link is in the meetup event, which you can find on the meetup page. What else? Oh, HandmadeCon, if you don't know, is happening next week, Thursday and Friday. It's a very programmery oriented conference that usually happens in Seattle, and they're doing it in Boston this year, which should be pretty cool. Let's see. What am I missing?
Is there Game Loop next month?
Game Loop,
I think
yes.
Game Loop is happening whilst I'm away, so I probably can't make it to that one. But
Let me look up the details on that.
Registration for Unite, I think, is now open. Is that correct? I saw an email about it, but I haven't yet checked. Yeah. So look out for that if you plan on going to attend.
Well, Graham's looking up Game Loop. What it is a sort of a self-organizing conference where people come in and people pitch ideas or what they're interested in, and then people like pool together and they see like what talks or topics might be most interesting, and then those talks happen. It's very cool. It's been going on quite a few years now, like maybe 10 or more. And I don't remember if it's in person or not this year. It might be.
Yeah, it's at the MIT Building 34, so right in Kendall Square, and it's actually been going on for I think close to 15 years now, which is insane. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
So, yeah, should be good.
Okay. If anyone else has any announcements, please feel free to put them into the Twitch chat, and we will read them out for you. But in the meantime, we can hand over to Laurent, who is going to talk about dots and the latest and greatest things in Unity. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to have you here tonight.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, well, thank you so much for the invitation. That's really cool. Yeah, there is definitely a lot that has been happening in the last few versions of Unity, or at least in 2022 RTLs, which is the one that I'm the most excited about. And I kind of wanted to touch on two big topics today. One is dots, and the other one is multiplayer, because there's also a lot of stuff that has been happening for multiplayer in the last few months. And I'm kind of in charge of both areas. So that's something that I can talk a lot about. Feel free to ask questions along the way, I guess, because we're going to be having like some, I guess, interaction. Like if we see interesting questions popping up, then we might just stop and chat about it. But to support the whole thing, I have a bunch of slides, visuals to illustrate the topic and explain a little more what we mean by things like dots or the latest like things like multiplayer capability that we have in Unity and what it might mean for game developers and game creators. Should I go on, share my screen and get into the slides? Okay, let's do that. I'm going to start away with dots content. So I'm going to try to take the right window. Okay, hopefully you're seeing now Unity engine dots. And I've lost the rest of the cues. What am I looking for? All right. So
I'm not sure that what you're sharing is showing besides your deck. There's things blocked out.
Yeah, it should be good now.
Okay.
For some reason, the zoom, my other windows are kind of blocking out for some reason. Try again to share. Or it's because I kind of, when you optimize the sharing in Zoom with for video clips, then it just have this weird behavior of kind of blocking other windows in a way. Anyway, so let me get me started on that. If you've been like using Unity for a while, you probably heard about that like many times. It's been an ongoing thing for a lot of years. And behind all of this was the general idea of trying to get Unity creators to get to more ambitious games. The general thing is like Unity is super accessible. You can iterate very fast. You can prototype games very fast. You can build a lot of things very quickly in Unity. But when you're trying to get into bigger games, that's where things kind of become a little bit more tricky with Unity. And so that was our intention to like push back the boundaries of Unity and make sure that you can actually get into larger productions. And we kickstarted that effort like probably 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. It's been a long endeavor. And a lot of this was meant to just like push those limits so you can build bigger games. And we came up with this overall idea of a data-oriented technology stack. It's not something new. It's not something we invented. Like data-oriented technology stack is something that was widely used already in AAA game production. And we just try to grab some of the element and concept of this and apply that to a Unity ecosystem. That was the overall idea. And we ended up by designing like 3 different big technological elements that would help us get to a data-oriented technology stack. At the bottom of the stack here, you're seeing the compiler burst. So it's basically like everything is simpler in Unity because it's all C#, so super easy to write, super easy to iterate on. But C# interpreted is not the fastest and the greatest in terms of performance target. So Burst compiler would actually compile it down to native code so you can run as fast as if you have written that down with C++, basically. In a lot of cases, like there are kind of cases where it's faster, kind of cases where it's slower, but in general, like you get native code performance kind of behavior. The C# job system, that's all about scheduling things in a way that is more parallelizable in Unity. It's not easy to make things happen in parallel in Unity, but the job system is meant to get us on that track of having an engine that is more and more parallelizable. And then the last piece of it, called ECS for Entity Component System, is something that was experimental for years. It just took us a lot of time to actually figure that out in a way that was usable in a Unity ecosystem. And we finally released the ECS stack, ECS entities package 1.0 with Unity 2022 RTS a couple of months ago. So that's amazing because it's been a long time in the work. And it promises a lot of additional room for you to grow your production into bigger space, bigger games, more complex gameplay, and a lot of things. I'm going to get back to that in a second, right? What does that mean in terms of game production? But the overall big element of that slide is that it's all now usable in production, in the sense that you're going to be supported if you get in a problem. If you've been trying or using Dart or ECS in the past few years, maybe you have experienced that those things will change a lot of, very frequently. APIs will kind of break between versions. And if you log the bug, you probably would have seen that bug being closed as one fix because we were still learning and stabilizing that technology. This is now part of the past because we got to a version 1.0, and the semantic of that version 1.0 means it's now supported in production for all the platforms that Unity supports. So it's a feature like any other feature of the engine, basically. That's what it means. And so that's great because now you can safely go and use this for your game. And if you are getting in trouble, Unity is going to be there to make sure that it works for you. So that's the situation we're in right now. So I'm going to tell you a little more about what does that add basically to Unity, like what is new that you couldn't be doing before. And to do that, I'm going to walk you through a couple like different pieces of the value proposition. But first and foremost, something that I just kind of mentioned is that it's supported. And with that support, something that was important that has changed over the last year in 2022 is that we actually pivoted from wanting Dart to be something a little bit like a new engine into embracing the fact that we were adding a new value into the Unity engine. We didn't want like everybody to have to relearn, how to make a game in Unity or that kind of things. And that was a little bit how we started that. Maybe there was a little bit of a feeling at the beginning that maybe we could do another Unity, and just forget about some of the things we have built over the years that we were struggling to maintain. But we have changed our mind because definitely what we've been seeing with early adopters of Dart is that 100% of the early adopters that were building games with ECS and Darts were basically doing some like mix up between game object architecture, ECS architecture, choosing basically the right tool for the right task. And that's what we've been learning over the years, and that's what we've been landing in 2022. That doesn't do everything, but it really focuses on the few things where there is critical performance path to be obtained. So it's fully supported for all the platforms Unity have, and it comes with a bunch of tools. If you've had tried Dart or ECS, let's say 2 years ago, it was basically just a simple API and you had no tools to help you with it. In Unity 2012 LTS, you actually have a lot of tools that comes with it. So you have a scene view where you see entities, game object all together. You can see like project data, live data, mix mode. You can see the archetype. You can see all those things. Like it's a fully integrated feature in the engine. So you can have in the editor all the tooling you need to manipulate your ECS project. So that's one thing. Streamline ECS workflow. What it means is that we're trying to ensure that everything you're doing with a game that is based on game object is something that you can add ECS to. Like basically, don't try to reinvent everything you've been doing with your game and put it in a data-oriented way. Maybe what you need is to have a super great control and amazing performance with physics simulation. And then maybe that's where you need ECS. And maybe if your sound system or your sound environment doesn't need that performance, maybe you don't need to get there with that. And so it's fine to keep it on game object, introduce ECS for where you need the performance and the super critical performance, and then bridge those things together. And there's a bunch of tools that comes with ECS 1.0 that help you do that, like where you can have a bunch of the data that is based on game object, like you used to. And then you would bake that into ECS data so that at runtime you get the best of the performance. So there's a bunch of those things that are coming with ECS 1.0. Flexible game architecture, what it means is that it's a natural benefit of trying to architect a game using ECS. Like I mentioned earlier, ECS, Entity Component System, is not something we have invented. It is a regular, like a classic pattern for large production. And what it means is that you separate the algorithm from the data. And so entities is basically identifiers component is the data, and systems are the algorithm, the gameplay features. And so by organizing things this way, then when you change things along the way in production, then you're more resilient to change. One of the examples that we're showcasing here is Semblink with the game Heroish. They were kind of making an amazing talk at GDC 2023. Google it out. It's super interesting. And they kind of explain how they build up the overall production environment in a way that make them more resilient to gameplay changes. In fact, they added multiplayer relatively late in their production without having to re-architect the game, which was, so they kind of knew they wanted to get to multiplayer. So they also made it in a way that was easier to get to multiplayer, but definitely like the concept on the ECS systems, you can add, remove system easily, which means you add and remove gameplay features easily without having to redesign your architecture. So that's really, really cool. Control and determinism. This is something we had showcased at GDC 2022 already with an earlier version of DOTS. In Unity, so far, you've been having like maybe experienced that challenge where with game object or with your memory, you don't really have full control over what's happening. Like it's garbage collection kick in at any time, you don't really control it, or maybe some mono behavior function get called before other ones, and you don't really know in what order things will be happening, and you don't really have control over your frame execution or the memory layout. And so not lacking control means that you might get to a point where you might need another 10% of performance gain and you can't really make it happen. So that's what ECS brings. Like when you make a lot of your project based on ECS, then you control the entirety of its memory layout and you control exactly how the frame is going to be executed. Taking control means that you're also complexifying your production. We have to be honest here. Using ECS means that the game code and the game architecture is a little more complicated than just using game objects. But with better control, you get more power and you can actually get to the performance target that you need on your device. Which means, and by the way, I should pause for a second to explain what Electric Square were doing with this, because it's actually amazing. What they were doing is, because of all of that control and determinism that we're getting out of the execution of the gameplay, they were able to record basically the entirety of multiplayer game sessions, gameplay, frame by frame, and they would just stack that up and they would use this for QA process. So basically like recording the entirety of the multiplayer game session, frame by frame, and then they would replay that in QA, find issues, and then those issues will get into production. They will get developers fixing those issues, modifying the code, issuing fixes, and replaying the game session and validating that it actually solved the problem in production. So that's the kind of like thing that comes with having control over everything that's happening, is that you have a deterministic execution that you can reproduce over and over and over again and get consistent results. That also helps with multiplayer games, but I can come back to that later. Best leverage hardware resources. What that means is that if you have control over the memory and the processing, that means that you can actually, if you're targeting a specific device, if you're targeting a specific device, then you can get to the exact like utilization of the maximum of the hardware that is available. That was kind of a chat we got with Aztec Forgotten Gods on Switch. Switch is often like considered as being a challenging device because it has some constraint that you need to navigate, and having control here helps you like just leverage every little bit of the device for the performance of your game. Massive data streaming, that's a very natural result of using a data-oriented architecture. What it means is that the data is already like laid out in a way that is friendly with your memory layout. So you can move data around from disk to memory, from memory to memory with no extra processing to do. Stanlock Studio V-Rising, I think they were telling us they have about 3 million dynamic objects on server for a single instance of an open world. And all of those objects are kind of interactive object that needs to be synchronized like on a regular basis for multiplayer kind of scenarios. So it's a lot of data, it's a lot of things to load up and load out all the time. And in Unity without DOTS technologies, then you need to iterate over a game object, and or each of the game objects is going to have their own behavior and so on and so forth. With data-oriented architecture, you basically batch process, move all of that data from one place to another, and you don't have to do anything about it. So it's extremely efficient. Simulation scale, that's a second benefit of being data oriented, is that when you have the data in memory that is super well laid out, then you can batch process it. And batch processing the data means that you can have a way bigger room for simulating stuff. Hostile mouse is a good example of that because it's both the physics simulation and the NPC AI simulation. That is something that they really push the limit of for having a lot of NPCs, a lot of physics simulation, and having a very decent performance out of it. That's something that you wouldn't be able to do with GameObject, unfortunately. Large multiplayer games, there is a lot of things that contributes to being able to make better multiplayer games with that technology. First of all, there is a netcode package that comes with that is dedicated to competitive multiplayer games. So it's about dedicated server kind of scenarios where you need a lot of performance and low latency kind of gameplay that you need to do. Something we didn't really have in Unity. Since the time where we deprecated units, we kind of had a little bit of a gap where we didn't have a lot of resources for helping with multiplayer game development. Starting with 22 RTS, now we have different netcode solutions. One is based on that, another one that I'm going to also talk about a little bit later. And there is a bunch of additional benefits on doing multiplayer game based on dots that you can also simulate multiple worlds within the same process. So you can have two different aspects of that. You can do sessions of debugging where you have server and clients together into the same process. So you can actually debug a networked environment. But you can also like having multiple game sessions running on a single server, which is pretty amazing. And all of that without having to mix up the memory space. So that's kind of a direct benefits of using ECS. And when you put all those different things together, the control, the determinism, the streaming, and so on, then we basically get to a point where we can just push back the limits of what Unity runtimes can make. And so we're getting to larger games, things that are getting more and more open world kind of games with a multiplayer dimension to it. So very excited to see what game creator is going to be doing with those new capabilities. A quick focus on physics in particular. I talked a little bit about Hostile Mouse. Hostile Mouse is using Havoc. There's kind of a bunch of different physics engine now in Unity because you have NVIDIA PhysX that is already available based on the GameObject architecture that we have in Unity. And with the introduction of ECS 1.0, we landed two new physics engine. One that is a native implementation that can help with smaller deterministic simulation. It's called Unity Physics. And the other one is Havoc Physics for Unity that is also based on ECS. So with those different engines coming up, then we can cover more ground and more use cases. And in particular, Havoc is very well known for being able to support very, very complex simulations with a lot of objects that you're going to want to stack up. And so that definitely just adds up to whatever Unity is able to support for you. Something also very, very interesting for dots is that now the ecosystem is picking up on the reality of dots becoming a feature of Unity. So the folks at JetBrains Rider have been kind of working with the engineering teams at Unity to help with like having environments that are dots aware. So you can like write code in Unity that is dots oriented, ECS based, and then Rider can help you with generate a large number of elements that would help you write your overall architecture in there. Here, for example, it can generate bakers for you. There is a number of new capabilities where Rider is going to be able to generate some of the code that you might need to manipulate the relationship between game objects and entities. Here, aspect that particular feature where it makes like some sort of wrapper around data-oriented design and make it more usable, like object-oriented, I would say, architecture. And then more generally, like it's going to be doing inspection and fixes of your code based on what you've been writing and the best practices for writing that code. So it's super cool to see some of our partners doing more of those kind of dots friendliness development. That's just going to make the whole thing easier for you to navigate. Couple of resources to continue the conversation on that. There's always a forum at Unity that is super active. The dot engineering team is very active on the forum. They're also pretty active on the Discord server. So don't hesitate to get there. There is a roadmap post that we're making almost every quarter. I think it's up to date June. Is that June the last one? Yeah, I think it's June the last one. Where we're kind of telling a little bit where we're going next. Then we have a roadmap page. You can Google that Unity Engine roadmap and you're going to just find it, where we basically expose some of the things that are coming up in the area of dots, and you can interact with that content and giving us feedback. And then there is a bunch of resources that are kind of stacking up for dots that we started doing in 2022 and 2023. In particular, I would say, if you look for GDC content, we have amazing showcase that we've been doing for dots that explains more details, but also from the lens of game creators or how it's been useful for them in production. The ones that are super interesting will be the one with Electric Square, Ramen VR. They were together on stage talking about the games and what kind of benefit that would bring to them. The case study with Stanlock Studio is a 3 hours long live stream where they go in full details about how they kind of build up stuff on top of ECS. Ixion is very interesting. RH2, Easter is more of a multiplayer story, but also very interesting. So if you Google that out, you should be able to find those things. But we can also probably follow up with some of the links to be shared with the user group. So maybe I can pause for a second here on dots. I have additional content I want to talk about for multiplayer, but is there anything that we should double click on for that?
We have had some questions in from the audience. I'm going to go through a couple of these questions at least now for you, if you can answer them. Where are we? First one, when saying it's every platform, is it fully compatible with WebGL builds too?
So there is one small detail about WebGL. So that's a very good question. The detail is the entities graphics package. So there is ECS is composed to a bunch of packages. In ECS 1.0, we landed 4 different packages: entities package, and then entities graphics, netcode, and physics. The entities graphics package is supposed to take entities data and bring it over to your scriptable render pipeline, SRP, URP, or a scriptable render pipeline that you made yourself. That's all good, but in the specific case of WebGL, there is a little bit of a gap because it would need WebGPU to be able to natively translate your ECS data to the graphics pipeline. So what we recommend in the specific case of WebGL, where you actually cannot make the utilization of WebGPU, but still want to use ECS as your gameplay infrastructure, is that you basically skip entities graphics, the whole package, don't use it. We have a sample that is available on our GitHub that shows how to bring the ECS data and convert it back to game objects so that you can use your regular WebGL pipeline that is in Unity so that you can actually render it on a WebGL application.
That's super useful. Thank you. We have a few other questions too. Can you say a little bit about the difference between the burst compiler and IL2CPP?
I'm afraid I'm gonna not be super explicit here. Maybe I'm gonna have to follow up on that question and get some help from engineering. Yeah, I really need to get some real, because I couldn't make up some answer here, but I'm not sure it will be exactly right. So I prefer to get back to the team and just make sure that what I'm going to be saying is fine here. To my understanding, like the technologies are very similar in a way. Like I believe some of those things are kind of using one another. But yeah, I'm going to have to check.
Okay, thank you. Can you clarify a bit more about Havoc versus Unity physics with multiplayer and ECS? Must we use Havoc? Is Unity physics with ECS deterministic or only Havoc?
Yeah, both are deterministic. So anything you base on ECS will be deterministic. Well, it's not a guarantee, but the way we're doing it is in a deterministic way. So Unity physics is deterministic. The difference between Havoc and Unity physics is that Unity physics is stateless and Havoc is stateful. So what that means is that Unity physics will be kind of fully reinterpreted based on the inputs we got, and Havoc's going to keep a cache of that simulation. But in fact, what it means from like the value you're going to get from your games in particular is you're probably going to get a lighter physics engine with Unity physics when the requirements you have are not too heavy, and you're still going to have the full determinism you might be looking for, let's say, a competitive gameplay on a multiplayer game. Havoc really is going to be shining when you're going to need to have more complex simulation with a lot of content, because it scales super well and it has that maturity of all the games and decades of being used in production, which is not the case for Unity physics. So Unity physics is like kind of a newer implementation. It's smaller, less feature, younger, but it is deterministic based on ECS, so you can get far in terms of the size of the simulation. If the quality is more important that the actual speed, then Havoc might be a solution. Then we are working at trying to bridge together those different physics engines so it gets easier to actually switch from one to another.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a couple more questions. Do you want to continue with those, or do you want to carry on with the presentation?
I'm good. I'm good on time.
Okay. All right. So we have a question. I'm just trying to read it correctly. Performance of ECS netcode is still bad on mobile platforms, mid-range Android platform, and not low-end Android platforms yet. Can you tell the ECS mobile runtime team to further optimize runtime? Yeah. Are there any sort of comments about general optimization tips for mobile development with ECS?
So hopefully, I'm kind of seeing the chat also on Twitch here. Hopefully, the name in the chat is similar to the name we have on the forum. So I kind of, I think I know where the question is coming from. We can definitely follow up on that, I guess, because I'm going to need some more details to understand what is exactly the context in which Optimize is getting that performance. Maybe there is something there. What I know is we did the Megacity multiplayer demo especially for that purpose, like trying to challenge ourselves in having something that will be production environment kind of situation. And I haven't showed that because I was kind of waiting for the multiplayer content to show it, but we kind of prepared, like, we took the Megacity demo that we had made years ago and we turned it into a version that is fully based on ECS 1.0. And we like made it multiplayer with a large number of players. But this demo doesn't actually run on mobile. It's HDRP based, so it's not really mobile friendly. That's the next step for us. We're going to take that demo. We're going to try to bring it, this one or a different one, we're going to bring it to a mobile device so that we can challenge ourselves in the fact that we actually have a netcode solution that scales well on mobile devices. Right now, I wouldn't be able to just say that's the case, that's not the case, because we haven't really tested it for real and we couldn't really prove anything because we don't really have a benchmark situation to be based on. But that's the next step for us. We really need that one. So that's a very good question. It's a gap. Right now, we cannot really demonstrate what's the performance we're getting for lower end mobile devices, but we know we need to do that, and that's next on our list of to do.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question here. A big benefit of the Unity scripting and component architecture has been iteration speed and accessibility to designers who aren't explicitly programmers. Is ECS considered still suitable for that side of development, or is it recommended more for a programming specialist optimizing designs after the core has been experimented on previously?
So I would answer that by answering what customers and users have told me, as opposed to what is my opinion. Like, my opinion doesn't matter here. It's more like what we've been hearing from early adopters. So what we've been hearing from early adopters most of the time is this is harder than game object because it takes some thinking before we actually get into messing up with the gameplay. And that's fair. Like, it's data oriented, so that means that you need to think about the data structure before you write your line of code. And that, like, anticipation is oftentimes like a problem for creatives. People need to get into the mess of things and then figure things out as you go. So that's fair. ECS in that regard is kind of being considered by the early adopters as something more difficult to get into at first. What we also hear from people that have been able to get through that first pass or that first barrier is that after they got through that first step of understanding that they need to pause, lay out the data, and then get back into gameplay writing, is that after that, they're way faster in iteration time. But it takes a little bit of getting used to. So we're kind of hesitating in between two things now. We are just wondering how much can we make that easier to do, which would be one approach. And we have a few ideas for that. And the second thing is how much community content we lack to make that easier for everybody. If when you were Googling, how do I write this kind of behavior in Unity, you were getting some sort of template and people explaining how you should do it so that it's data-oriented friendly. Maybe we wouldn't find that too hard because we would have that kind of starting point. And right now, we're lacking a lot of that community content to help guide a lot of Unity users. So we're also working on that round. Like, we feel like there is some sort of community activation that needs to happen so it gets easier to get started. And at the same time, we fully realize that because of that immediate first step, you need to think about what you need to do before you actually do it. There's probably ways to make that simpler. In fact, if you check out the Sandblick Entertainment Hero-ish talk, the CTO, Justin Larrabee, there exactly talk about what they did in production to resolve that problem. So they basically took Playmaker and scrapped out all the nodes, and they re-implemented a bunch of nodes that were based on their ECS systems, something like 100, if I remember well, 150 nodes. And then they gave that to the designers. And so the designers built up the gameplay based on those nodes without having to know anything about ECS. And they iterated in production with this, and they didn't have to need programmer to do that. Now the creator of the nodes had to create it. So you need somebody in your team that has that expertise, that's for sure, that understand how to make that ECS architecture so that you can more easily leverage it across your team. So hopefully Unity might be able to figure something like that to make the overall experience a little bit simpler to pick up.
That's very promising. Thank you. What else did we have? Are there any actions that you recommend for a mid-sized studio to take before switching to ECS to make the transition easier for all disciplines involved?
So I guess obviously consuming learning content. That sounds like probably obvious as an answer. I guess another thing that could be good is, because we tried very hard to make ECS accessible as an increment to projects you might have already, maybe try to introduce it for a specific segment of your gameplay before you actually embrace it all. So you don't take too much risk too fast, basically, because it would be counterproductive. Okay, let's make something very clear. If you could make your game with, let's say, Unity 2021 without using ECS and ship that game, in Unity 2022, should you adopt ECS because it's there? The answer is no. Like, if you could do your game before and you didn't have a performance problem, a scalability problem, a multiplayer problem of sort, that kind of stuff, then you're probably fine with game objects. It's been doing the job for years and years and years, and it made a lot of people successful with the games. So let's not downplay the value of what we had in Unity before. So that is one thing. If you think you want to jump into it, it's probably because you've experienced some of the limits that Unity Engine had, whether it's because iterating over your game object was slow, or because you were struggling with keeping like memory under control on a device which has limited memory, that kind of things, then that's when you might want to introduce ECS. Start to introduce it for the part of your game that is sensitive to that problem. Let's say if it is a memory problem, that you might want to introduce ECS for the part of the gameplay related to where most of your memory is being used. If it is a performance problem, then maybe you want to introduce ECS specifically for the simulation system that is related to that, performance problem, like simulation of physics or NPC AI or that kind of things. And then grow from there as you kind of pick up the architecture and kind of start to understand how that works. Then maybe you can consider a larger use case.
Excellent, thank you. Was there one more question here? I'm having some issues with my laptop trying to see the chat at this time.
Might be good to.
Yeah, we could.
Sorry, it might be good to just carry on, and then we can sort of have some other questions at the end.
Let's do that.
Right. So should I jump into multiplayer?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. This time I'm going to also share sound. So I'm going to try to not put any windows in front of it. What does that look like? There's some kind of a few gray areas for some reason, but I don't have anything here.
Might be the Zoom overlay.
Do I hide this? Oh, there you go. Is that better?
Moved it to the center. Oh, there we go.
There
Okay,
you go.
now we're good.
That's better.
Okay. All right. So with multiplayer, there's a lot of things that happen just over the last 6 months. Actually, a little more now. I used to say 6 months, but it's more probably 8 now. And a lot of those things are kind of enabling a large number of use cases that we didn't really have before. The overall intention that we're trying to make here is to bridge the gap in between the time you start creating a game, you launch the game, and then you scale that game. And we start to have at Unity all the different pieces of technology that would help you across those 3 steps and kind of bridge them all together. So that a multiplayer game experience is not just about like creating it in the editor or whatever. It's all about the overall journey. Like you create that game, you have all the tools you need to create it, and then you go through the launch phase, and then you can grow, and you have this end-to-end platform that Unity provides that helps you get there. And so you don't have to worry about introducing additional risk down the line. And to start with this, there's been, in particular, one netcode stack that we've been pushing out. I think it was September 2022. So that's long ago, about 9 months. That is called Netcode for Game Object. Netcode for Game Object is a stack that we've built particularly for going after casual cooperative multiplayer game. So when your game is like not having particular performance intensive, specific, like competitive gameplay features, but it's more about bringing a bunch of people together in a casual co-op experience and getting some of that synchronization going on, then Netcode for Game Object is absolutely amazing. It's super simple to use. You might want to couple that with the release service that we provide as part of our setup services that is called Unity Gaming Services. And with those 2 things, plus the different tools that have been introduced at the same time in the editor, then you pretty much have everything you need to start with your first like multiplayer cooperative experience in Unity. That is something that we released, like I said, about September 2022, and we made it backward compatible to 2020 LTS and up. So 2020 LTS, 2021 LTS, and 2022 LTS now. So with this, you're kind of getting set up for do smaller games. Now, a lot of the desire out there is that's one kind of gameplay, but the next kind of gameplay that everybody wants to get into is competitive multiplayer games. And that kind of requires a lot more complexity, in particular kind of features like prediction, rollback of gameplay, and so on. And since the game object infrastructure doesn't really have like the level of control you might want to need for that kind of games, we also released a second netcode package that is called Netcode for Entities, and dedicated server, build target, and workflows that make the overall experience of creating a competitive multiplayer game easier. That came out with 2022 RTS because Netcode for Entities is based out of ECS, so dots that I just explained in the previous section. And we had to get to ECS 1.0 to claim that this is ready to use. So Netcode for Entities, dedicated server, and you might want to couple that with a few of the services that we have in our offering of Unity gaming services, game server hosting in particular to host those different games, and then boom, you have pretty much everything you need to do a large-scale multiplayer game. To make that like having a proof point of having tested this in a production environment, we did a new evolution of the Megacity sample that we've been starting doing a few years ago. And that Megacity multiplayer sample is something that demonstrates how to connect together a bunch of those services, some game server hosting, but also a bunch of others like identification, matchmaking, and Vivox, if I remember well, and on a setup that is 64 plus players. We use 64 here because we haven't actually had the opportunity to find more than about 100 humans to actually test that out for real. We think we can do way more. Hopefully we should be able to claim bigger numbers in the short future, but so far we've been testing that with about 100 players and it works super well. I'm gonna just play a short video that shows a little bit that interaction. So if you Google Megacity multiplayer, you're gonna just find that video on YouTube. So it's a pretty simple sample, a bunch of cars flying around in the Megacity setup. This is based on a HDRP project, so you're gonna it's available for desktop solutions, kind of work also in a console environment. It uses a bunch of the Unity gaming services, and then you have all of that into a big sample that you can get started with to build up a competitive multiplayer game. And hopefully you can get a bunch of different players there. So I mentioned netcode for game object, netcode for entities, but both netcode package are also based on a third package that is called transport. So transport is one layer down in the infrastructure. Transport takes care of basically the communication between two runtimes or a runtime and a server, for example. And that transport package gives you the opportunity to actually build your own netcode. So if you have in your team expertise about netcode solutions and you want to actually build up that netcode solution, then you can just go on based on top of transport, so you don't have to worry about networking communication and just build a netcode set of features that is relevant to your game. This is what happened with TurboGrafx Racing, Huge Carve Studio, been kind of building their own netcode solution based on top of transport so that they can get exactly the set of features they needed for a highly competitive and physical game. Oh, I also forgot to mention, I should have probably said that, let me get back in time for a second, but netcode for game object was showcased through the example of Shape of Fools from Fika Production. The netcode for entities use case was showcased with Istera from Sticky Lock Studio, and then TurboGrafx Racing, Yoshkarf. Those three guys were on stage with me at GDC 2023 to explain the differences that they were led them to make choices about the network infrastructure, the different packages they use, the different challenges they had. So highly recommend that. I'm gonna have some details about those things right next. Just before I get there, a couple also list of different services that exist as part of UGS, so Unity Gaming Services. I mentioned a couple of those that are being used in Megacity Multiplayer. You can see on the left here in Build Your Foundation, authentication, game server hosting, matchmaker, I think relay, no, not relay, matchmaker, game server hosting, lobby, and maybe VVox, second column at the bottom, like were some of the services we put together. But Unity Gaming Services has a lot of different services that cover the different phases of your game production. So definitely encourage you to check it out, because a lot of this is still relatively new to a lot of the Unity users. A lot of the services are things that we recently put all together that are kind of behind the same kind of dashboards into our cloud that allow you to really monitor and develop your game, even when after you have published something out of Unity and go into the live phase of your game. So a bunch of resources to get started with multiplayer. We're really going fast into our ability to provide you with everything you need for multiplayer games. This is something that for quite a while we've been quiet about because a lot of this was in the work, but now things are kind of hitting the market on a very regular basis. So on the left here, a couple links. As I mentioned for that, the forum is a great place to get conversation going about multiplayer, or on Discord, there is a dedicated Discord server for multiplayer conversation for Unity. There is a roadmap on unity.com that shows some of the things that we are working on for the future. So I definitely check this out because you can also comment and give us feedback from there. And then in terms of content, there is a bunch of different things that have been done recently. Webinars on the usage of Netcode Game Object, bite-sized samples are a way to also get started with smaller examples of how to put a multiplayer experience together. And then competitive action, Sunblink Entertainment Hero-ish, that was GDC 2023. It's a use case both in between dots and multiplayer. So that's very interesting to watch. And the last three ones, Fika Production, Huge Cat, and Sticky Lock Studio were together in a panel at GDC with me where they were kind of explaining the differences between their games. A couple samples also that we put together to have getting you started. Boss Room is a pretty large sample, 8 players, 3D, for a co-op game with an integration of relay and lobby. Galactic Kittens, 4 players 2D co-op sample. We have an ECS racing game, car racing game, up to 16 players with hosting, game server hosting, and VVox. And then the new Mega City multiplayer that is 64 plus players. Like as I mentioned a little bit earlier with some of the question we got, this Mega City multiplayer is something that is more for desktop usage right now. But the next step for us is to get to a mobile experience so we can also demonstrate that we get a great performance with our Netcode solution for more lower hand devices on mobile.
Thank you very much.
Any question?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in chat just yet, aside from a request for the links in a clickable format. If you can either drop those links to us in chat and I can post them to the Twitch chat, or perhaps maybe we can share the presentation at some point, and we can post that on our meetup group when it's ready. No urgency to do it right now.
Okay, yeah, I can absolutely just send the wall set in an email. Does that work?
That sounds great. Yeah, and we can share it with the group, so that would be great. Thank you very much. Whilst we wait for other questions to come in, I did want to mention for the audience and for your benefit, we have some licenses for JetBrains Rider to give away at the end of this talk. So audience need to be ready for that. We're going to ask a question and they're going to have to answer. It won't be a tough question. We do have a question now, though. When you say it's helpful for multiplayer because it's deterministic on client and server, does that mean that it natively lets you do anti-hacking architecture by making the server fully authoritative and replays can play out exactly the same way just by recording the inputs and resimulating it? Any disclaimers?
So the execution of the code based on ECS is deterministic. If some of the gameplay is still based on monobehavior in game object, that part will not be deterministic. So you need to choose. So let's say you need physics, for example, to be deterministic, then you can achieve this if you base the physics simulation on ECS. So what is on ECS is deterministic. What is not on ECS might not be deterministic, like it's unpredictable, difficult to say. Though there is just one challenge that you need to be aware of. Right now, ECS has to be burst compiled. That's the normal way to use it. You build your code on ECS and then you burst compile that code. Burst does not does not guarantee deterministic result across CPU architecture right now. It is something we're working on. We know how to get there, but that's not something we have delivered yet. So let's say you are having players with different types of CPU architecture, Intel, AMD, whatever, like different types of architectures, even with the same vendor, you might still get some different floating point numbers results across math computation. So that's where determinism would stop. In some cases, that might create some gaps in the simulation, that's for sure. What we've seen across use cases of games that were requiring determinism is that most of the time that those kind of gaps are reasonable and they can live with it. But if you're trying to do something, let's say esport with a very specific requirement of determinism, then we cannot guarantee that we have full determinism cross-platform. So that will be the limitation. So it is deterministic. Let's say if you have the same kind of architecture across players because you're on console, for example, or you have a specific set of device, then you could also achieve that full determinism. If you're not in that situation, then you have a partial determinism, like the code execution is deterministic, but floating point computation number is not.
That's a really good answer. Thank you. This is a really good question coming up now. Does Unity 22 LTS have good way of testing multiplayer with multiple editors running on the single computer?
So it is something that we're working on. We have an experimental package that is having this behavior that's called multiplayer play mode. If you check it out on the forums and on Discord, you're going to find it. It's not something you're going to discover in the package manager because it's still experimental. And let's make it clear, we do not recommend you use that in production today. Though it is something that you can experiment with right now. It basically launches, like when you go to play mode, launches a bunch of different processes that will be using the same asset library. So that's where it's a little bit tricky from a quality standpoint. And we still have some work to do to make sure that it is robust from a design point of view. But you have a bunch of different processes that will be kind of launching next to each other so you can experiment the gameplay. Now, from a debugging point of view, that's not all working together, so it might be challenging to debug the kind of environment. So the short answer here is we're still working on it. We know it's important. We know that everybody wants to have some sort of solution where you can actually throw a bunch of clients and different processes all together and get a seamless debugging experience. And there's still a couple constraints that we have to navigate there. Hopefully we can get to some solution soon enough. In the meantime, there is that experimental package that is based on GameObject. If you're using a gameplay that is based on ECS, you can simulate multiple processes by having multiple worlds in the same process that are guaranteed to be independent from a memory point of view.
That's good. Do you have any options in that experimental package for like simulating a poor client connection and packet loss scenarios? And if not, can I add that to the feature request list?
That's already part of the feature request
Good,
list.
good. I thought it would be.
Actually, so I would have to double check, but right now we have 2 netcode libraries and we're kind of slowly like bringing them together because it doesn't really make sense to have a lot of different stack to manage. So slowly we're kind of merging the tools together, and I'm pretty sure network simulation of netcode for entities has already a bunch of those networking condition scenarios. And I think netcode for GameObject does too, but I can guarantee 100% what's the state of the feature on both sides. But we do have network condition simulation tools where you can simulate like lower bandwidth condition, mobile kind of network, and have some of those packet loss things happening.
That's great. Thank you. When will we have ECS animation and ECS visual scripting experimental release?
Yeah, that's a good question. ECS animation is something that we wanted to have with 1.0, and we were just not ready. The feature wasn't there. We have people working on the next step of our overall animation system. It was just not ready for prime time. So we decided to still go on with 1.0 because there is a lot of expectation out of being able to build bigger games with Unity, even if animation is not there yet. So in the meantime, what most of our early adopters have been doing with ECS is that they would just either do their own animation or keep the animation layer based on game object and mechanism. So that's one way. But we know that we need to bring a new ECS-based animation system to Unity. That's being worked on right now. I can't tell much about when it's going to hit the market.
Fabulous, thank you. Is there an update to the DOTS roadmap expected soon?
Yes, we have a lot of ideas about what could be next, and this is work in progress.
Excellent.
Usually, we've been doing a quarterly roadmap update post on the forum for the last year. We just missed Q1 2023, as far as I remember. So we did 6 quarter-based roadmap posts, and we've done the latest one in June. It didn't contain too much details about the future, but we should be doing another one in Q3, 4. Yeah, in the next few months, we should have another roadmap update. Hopefully, we're going to have more details about what's coming out next.
That's great, thank you. Did I miss any questions? It's a little hard to read the chat for me. I don't know that I did.
I see a comment about Turbo Mix Games. I also highly recommend it. Great place. Johnny was the creator there. He's doing amazing content around that. There was also one good 1 hour long introduction content from, oh my God, I have a blank right now. Oh my God, I don't remember. Anyway, if you look for ECS content, Code Monkey, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, another request for ECS visual scripting.
Oh yeah, sorry, I talk about animation, not visual scripting. When we made the acquisition of Bolt, we posed visual scripting based on ECS because we didn't want to confuse everybody, and at the time, we weren't fully certain of when ECS would be ready for 1.0. So we basically posed visual scripting for ECS, but based on an example I was mentioning earlier, Assembly Keywords doing it on their own, we definitely know it's possible. We just need to make space in our schedule to work on that and bring something that would help make putting a gameplay together for ECS a little bit easier to do. So that's still in front of us, but we're not working on it just right now.
Okay. Was there any more questions? I don't think there were there?
I have a pretty quick one that I don't know. Maybe there's not a great answer to this, but do you have an update on the status of like the small runtime Unity? Like I know that was a kind of a showcasing feature a while ago. I don't know if that's out yet or what the deal is.
you mean Tiny, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we need to do a little bit of backpedaling into the history of Dart to get back to Tiny. So once the idea of Dart emerged initially, and I remember I had a conversation with Joachim Ente, like maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever. And it was telling me, the reason why we got into Dart is because I feel like I had to fix some of the mistakes I made when I did the first version of Unity that is just, are living still today in the architecture. And I feel, that feeling of a small company that gets started and you get fast into building an engine and the infrastructure and everything. And then at some point, you just can't change it because you're kind of stuck with that architecture. And so when the idea of Dart first emerged, we really wanted to, I think we felt like maybe we could just redo Unity. Like, hey, what if we could just do the perfect game engine? Like, what would it look like, basically? So that was a little bit how the overall idea started. And thinking about this, then all of a sudden the opportunities were like very large. And we could say, okay, so maybe a lot of the things that clutter the runtime, we could just get rid of it and just be focused on a data-oriented runtime where only the system that matters to the data that is to be processed will be there. So that means we can shrink the size of that runtime to exactly be the size of what it needs to be. That was the general philosophy, but we felt that we could do it in a couple of years, and after 5-6 years we just got halfway there. It's just been a little more ambitious than we expected initially. So we are at the point now where we just pivoted a little bit so that we can add value into the Unity ecosystem and enable all of you to get one step further in the complexity of kind of games you want to make. And what that means is that we've given up on the general idea of reinventing entirely the runtime of Unity. So that means the tiny, specifically tiny, and we had a couple of variations of that. Tiny, which was meant to be a super, super small runtime that would be data oriented. And then we had another idea that was basically a dot runtime for more general use case, and even dot server that would be a data oriented application that would be dedicated to running server side code that is data oriented. But to make that work, we need all the Unity systems, game system, to be ECS compatible, as not the case today. Like, for example, we talked about animation. Animation's missing, so you need to run animation on game object. And so that means a dot runtime wouldn't be super useful today because you would have to basically fill the gap yourself of the missing systems. So we decided to pause this. Maybe it's going to come back soon enough because we're going to need to help with some of the sizes of the runtime we have, but it's not a short-term goal. The goal right now was just to make sure that whoever's building and struggling with building a multiplayer game today, whoever's struggling at having a good like physics simulation, streaming capabilities in the engine can actually get that as part of the experience they're familiar with, so they can enhance the experiences they're going to build.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Well, if we have no more questions, oh no, there was one more. When we'll start working on improvements to ECS content management. I would like to have similar like addressables.
There is, as part of ECS 1.0, there is something called Content Manager that is meant to help you leverage addressable in an ECS gameplay.
Okay. Thank you. Alrighty. We have some JetBrains licenses to give away. I do believe we have, at least 4. And what should we do to give them away? How about the first 4 people to type into chat, what do the letters ECS stand for? And wait for it. Hold music. Wait for the answers to come in. Hey, we have 4. Okay.
Excellent.
Mikely Mandev. I do love that name, by the way. That is hilarious. 3 Kittens Games, PF Dev, and Darmitage. We might even have a couple of extras. If you can, please message me. I just typed into chat. If you can message D Strawberry Girl with your email address. So on Twitch, send me a message right now. We will get your email address, and then we will send you the licenses. And I will look for those messages to come in somewhere, wherever Twitch shows you that you had a direct message, which I'm sure is somewhere in this delightful UI. I think you can right click and whisper to somebody. That might be the way you do it.
Don't put it in chat because that'll just dox yourself.
Yes.
Which is bad.
No, don't do that. Don't put your email address into the open chat. That's probably bad. I've got PF Dev. Hello. Darmitage, thank you. Excellent. Right. Perfect. Yes. So those of you who are DMing me now, who have figured out how to do so, you can have a JetBrains license as long as you send me your email address. I have at least one of them. I'm going to post this into our chat channel. Where I can find our chat channel. It's over here somewhere. I managed to close all of the important windows on my streaming PC, so now everything is all over here. I am very sorry. I'm not turning my back on y'all. I'm just trying to...
While Chris is struggling, if I dare say, should we put up the call for anyone with any last announcements they want to get out there? Like if you're launching a game, or you're trying to get a job, or you're hiring somebody, or whatever. Happy to broadcast those.
Okay. I have received 3.
Also, if there is anybody that is experimenting with VCS and has feedback, I'm happy to get connected. So don't hesitate to send people my way.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Yes, and we will, when we have links to share with everybody after the presentation is done, we will send them out via our, probably via, I don't know, we'll put a message out on the Meetup group or via the Google group. We'll also be posting a recording of this on our YouTube channel, so I can update the YouTube channel with any links on there too. At some point when I'm at a computer. Who else? I'm literally on a plane first thing tomorrow morning, so all right, so 3 kittens, Darmitage, I've got you both, and there we go. Eric J, you can have one too. All right, we have some winners. Cool. Thank you everybody for watching us this evening, and
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks again, Laurent. This was an excellent talk. It was really cool to see all the stuff coming finally to 1.0. I'm sure you're relieved.
Yeah, it's been a long way in the making, so we're glad it's out.
Yeah, hopefully maybe we'll move into like a live space again or something like that, and welcome you to come in person and meet us and talk and network and all that.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
I'm going to be at Gamescom in a couple of weeks, so if anybody is going there, just let me know and we can meet up in person.
Sweet.
Excellent. Okay, all right. Wow. We will stop the Twitch stream at this time. Thank you everybody for tuning in this evening, and we'll be back.